So I feel very privileged because I get to introduce Kathleen Cole. And when I first encountered her work, it was in December, and I received a bulk of submissions, and they were just numbers. I didn't know any names, and it was really hard at first because there was something to love about every submission. And I remember being really stressed. I'm like, okay, how am I going to choose? I'm like neck deep in this pool of talent. So I printed out all the submissions. I read all of them 3 times. Still was not having any luck. Made note cards, labeled, like put adjectives. I'm like, okay, what are the things, like some positives, like, okay, beautiful sentences, or spare sentences through which an accumulation creates poetic passages, or hindsight perspective. And so I was doing this, so I took it very seriously. And then I'm putting these note cards in the different piles, and each essay has like different note cards. So I'm like, okay, this isn't working. What am I doing? And I decided to step away, and I thought, like, why am I intellectualizing this? So I thought, okay, which essay can I not get out of my head? What's the one that I just keep thinking about the details, or there are sentences that are stuck in my brain and that I just can't stop thinking about? And it was Kathleen's essay. And I think part of the reason, too, is that she was doing things on a craft level that I'm jealous of, that do not come easily to me. Like the way that she has this almost at times like this very blue jeans tone, and then suddenly this beautiful burst of wisdom. I mean, one of the sentences, just in case, I don't know how far along she's going to be reading, to what point, but she'll have these extremely specific details, and then you'll get a sentence like this. He treated the women similarly, with endless love and trust, but limited attention. I believe this is what can make a person crazy, the steady love that never quits on you, that doesn't react to you. It makes you wonder if it has anything to do with you at all. I was just blown away at how she blended wisdom and just like cocktail waitresses, and just like these very seemingly everyday details, and that's something that I have a really hard time doing. And the way in which she shows the character of her father and all this complexity, like he does not feel like a flat character. Like by the end of the essay, I felt like I knew him, and you could also infer this great love that came out of the essay. And so it was so hard. Obviously, I made piles. I made note cards. This is something I do a lot of. But it was just so hard. But ultimately, this was the essay, I think, because there were so many aspects of it that I wish I could do, like on a craft level, things that I wish I could do. And I found myself thinking, well, how did Kathleen do that? So, that's how much I love the essay. So I feel very fortunate. And so I first knew her as a number. She was submission number 2. And now I'm excited that I'm sure in the future I'm going to encounter her name in magazines and eventually a book. And I feel very fortunate to be introducing her. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Way too nice. This has a title, but it's very forced, and I don't like it. So let's pretend it doesn't. My father hired my mother as a cocktail waitress in a downtown Atlanta hotel. Soon there was lipstick on his collar, and his girlfriend was gone. Soon my mother was pregnant, and when my brother was 9 months old, there was a wedding. 7 years into their marriage, he told her he was going to locomotive engineering school. He was a freight train conductor, which involved no glamour and much unpleasantness, like checking to see if the drunk man they hit was dead. And she told him she was going to California to live with a man she'd met online, and she was taking my brothers and me with her. The man turned out to be married, and 2 months later, she came screaming back to my father, beaten up and broke. For 2 years, she refused to leave. Lawyers were called. She sold him her engagement ring, tricked him into giving it back, sold it to him again. He never gave the ring to his second wife. Instead, he saved it to give to me. My father was not a pickup artist. He stuck to a single tried and true strategy. He was not good with housework or odd jobs or cars, but he could grow anything. He experimented with different grasses, planted a red maple and a dwarf blue spruce, blocked our view of the neighbors with cherry laurel. His gardening did not form a cohesive picture or have any kind of guiding principle, but it did suggest a certain amount of vigor. This was his game. In the neighborhood, he sought out overgrown yards and offered to mow the grass if the occupant was a single woman. As it happened, the only single women in our neighborhood were divorced, women he imagined needed help in the way that he needed help. Women accepted this offer. In this manner, he tore through many of our neighbors. He also talked to women online. He kept all of his usernames and passwords on a single piece of notebook paper in the computer desk, and I got up hours before everyone else to sit in a red chair, reading his emails and logging into accounts with usernames that were all some variation of train driver. My favorite site was one called hotornot.com, brazen in its simplicity. He logged in and rated women as hot or not. My father was fun. He poured wine into bottles of fruit-flavored fitness water and called it sangria. He told animated stories dotted with sound effects, and then it started hailing, ping, ping, ping. He did not need to worry about the future. Working on call negated the possibility of planning more than one day at a time. Single dads were so unheard of that I had to remove my mother from school forms entirely so that they would call him at all. Women both admired and took pity on his situation, but it was never in doubt that they were needed. A year and a half into my father's second marriage, we moved out of his wife's house. There had been very little to move by the time Sandra became aware that we were leaving. For weeks, my father had been sneaking what he could into a storage unit, afraid that Sandra would somehow destroy everything when she found out. I had visions of her dangling my television out of my bedroom window, holding it by the cord as if trying to strangle it. I left the television for her. It was good for nothing, its only feature being a defunct built-in VCR. When we did leave, my brothers were out of town, so I was left alone with my father to carry everything into the townhouse we were renting. An older Mormon boy at school, who had once taken me on a date, had offered to help, and I called him because I was scared, seeing that my father had no plan aside from leaving. The boy never called back. It had been a lousy date. If my father said he was coming home at 5, I'd better plan on having dinner at 6. Many nights I cooked and immediately put the food, box dinners, pasta, strictly starches, and ground meat, into Tupperware for him to eat whenever he returned. Many nights, he eventually confessed, he ate dinner twice unable to decide who was most important. But he was always cheerful, always ambling around with bourbon and Mountain Dew, telling his railroad stories. Nothing brought him down, not when he figured out that while he was gone, I was dating a 24-year-old. Not when he discovered my cigarettes and what he called pot-smoking devices in the garage. I did these things with the knowledge that what I was looking for was attention, and thought, so what? I did want his attention. Asking for it wasn't enough. Everyone was asking for his attention. His wife, the other woman he saw on the side, my brother. But when he found out, he just asked me to stop what I was doing, and trusted me when I said I would. Every night, he dropped my brother off with one of his friends and went back to one of the two women, and I smoked cigarettes past the green Marlboro logo and buried them under his Pall Malls in the ashtray he thought he'd hidden. He treated the women similarly, with endless love and trust, but limited attention. I believe this is what can make a person crazy. This steady love that never quits on you, that doesn't react to you. It makes you wonder if it has anything to do with you at all. When I went to college, he quietly moved back in with Sandra. I didn't know until I called to ask for his address, and he gave me hers. When I was 15, I had told them that if they stayed together, I would never come back. And here we were, and I was never going back. Of course, I did go back. Sometimes at night, he and Sandra followed each other around, arguing over which of them had a drinking problem. Sandra was the obvious choice for the wife because she was only outrageous when drunk. There was a sharp distinction in Sandra when she drank, phases she passed through. First very happy, amicable, offering me beers and inviting me to go kayaking. Then, about the time the drinks ran out, she turned mean, calling my father a fucking idiot who couldn't put down a bottle. Finally, she was sad. Did he even love her? What kind of marriage was this? My father did not go through such changes, just spent entire days in a buoyant haze. In college, I learned that Bailey's was a drink, not something for coffee in the morning, and that switching from beer in the afternoon to wine with dinner to liquor at night was not something I could imitate without consequences. I did not know my father sober, but Sandra did. During one of my spring breaks, we went together to a Mexican restaurant and stood around the bar waiting for a table. My father went to speak to the bartender. Sandra twirled her highlighted hair with her left hand. "Do you think we'll ever get a table?" I asked, uncomfortable with the silence. She faked a laugh. "Probably not." I walked quickly over to my father and leaned over his shoulder to order a beer for myself. My father looked down at me. "I'm proud of you," he said, and I noticed how the wrinkles that grew from the corners of his eyes made him look tired. Sandra appeared at his other shoulder, her fingers still twirling her hair. He smiled down at her. "Hey, baby," he said, and kissed her. "Where have you been?" "Waiting for you," she said, looking pointedly into his face. "Hey," my father said, looking back to me. "Why don't we just sit at the bar?" We all nodded at each other and walked to some empty seats. Our pint glasses of light beer were indistinguishable. Thank you.